So it seems like the Vegapunk and Leloucia Kingdom connection that Oda teased way back in chapter 1062 is becoming a bit clearer. Up until now, the safe assumption was that Emu used the ancient weapon Uranus to erase the island from existence, while the speculation on Vegapunk's involvement was done so blindly. But the discourse has shifted, and the community is now considering other possibilities. There are now two options. One, this is not Uranus, but either a creation of Vegapunk's or a copy, similar to how a copy of Pluton's blueprint was left behind in Water 7. Or two, this is Uranus, and Vegapunk merely provided the world government with its power source. Today I'd like to go through both possibilities, determine which I think is more likely, and then talk about what this can mean for the story going forward. But first, a word from our sponsor, coffee. I need it. Seriously though, if you haven't read up to chapter 1086, then I suggest you do that before you continue because I will be spoiling you. And without further ado, let's jump into it. As chapter 1086 came to a close, it not only left us with a gaping 5-week hole in our hearts, it also gave us several giant reveals to gawk over. But most importantly, it brought us back to present day. There are quite a few details that we've been giving during this arc and during the Reverie flashbacks that will give us proper build-up for Egghead's climax. And by build-up, I mainly mean context, because until we get a payoff, foreshadowing can mean anything. And we already know by this point that Oda knows exactly how to mislead us. So context is going to have a great deal of influence in how I judge both of these possibilities. Starting with number 1. Vegapunk really made a weapon of mass destruction. Throughout the Egghead arc, and well, the entire story, Vegapunk has proven himself to be a genius scientist who truly is a cut above the rest. It might be easy to forget this with the reveal of the Holy Knights, but up until we got that post-Wano clarity, the Marines seemed short-handed going into the endgame. Sure, we were told to trust the SSG, but at that time many still assumed that Vegapunk was secretly working against the world government. It was the introduction of the Seraphim that balanced the scales and showed us why Vegapunk alone could be the deciding factor in the final war. Since arriving at Egghead, we've been clobbered over the head with invention after invention to give us more context for why Vegapunk is so valuable. And as of chapter 1086, we've been introduced to 7 highly durable warlord replacements who, for the most part, have displayed abilities that can erase islands and Yonko crews in an instant. So, when we top this off with an island vanishing machine, it's easy to believe that the world's greatest scientist simply made another powerful weapon for the world government. Unless of course you know anything about Vegapunk as a character. Based on the reactions of people who know him well, like the Revolutionary Army, Vegapunk would never do this. You might turn your daddy into a mindless robot slave, or administer the paternity test that proves you have a daddy, but once you dig deeper you might find that those claims are lacking serious context that could change their entire meaning. For example, we don't know the details that surround Weevil's relation to Whitebeard. He could be his legitimate offspring, or he could have been created in such a way that fundamentally flips the very definition of birth on its head. I mean, reconsidering our current understanding of the world is one of the very first concepts that is thrown at us in this arc. And we did have this question posed to us in the same chapter that we learned about the world's first successful clone. So, even if we do learn that Jean Jacket over here was created by Vegapunk, I'm sure it wouldn't be that cut and dry. I mean, we technically have an avenue for a version of Vegapunk that would make a WMD in Lilith, but it seems like the satellites have already served their main purpose, which is to set up this whodunit scenario and reveal York as the reason for the arc's conflict. Also, I almost forgot, there's no way that this can literally be a copy of Uranus, because I know in the past I've talked about how Egghead is sort of reminiscent of Enies Lobby, but I think we could all agree that this would be going a little too far. However, before we move into the second option, there's a very important question that I need to address. Is it Mother Flame or Mother Frame? For those of you who aren't aware, the scan translation refers to Vegapunk's invention as the Mother Flame, whereas the Viz translation refers to it as the Mother Frame. Now, I believe that we can come to a consensus rather easily without even having to go into like translation inconsistencies or Japanese pronunciation, because frame would imply the weapon itself, whereas flame would be referring to the power source. And since I've already made my case for why I think Vegapunk would never create a WMD, I can't in good faith consider the word frame. So I'm siding with the scans on this one. Not that one. I mean, no disrespect to the team at Viz, but even without the narrative context, the transparency in the scan team's decision-making alone is enough for me. And they're also just more fun.
Correct translation or not, this is canon to me!
And with that out of the way, let's move on to the more interesting option. This is Uranus, and Vegapunk simply provided its fuel, the Mother Flame. First of all, I don't even need to reuse Ivankov and Dragon's comments about Vegapunk to prove that old Jean Jack in here wasn't created by him, because Shaka and Robin basically tell this to us in 1066. Shaka tells us that a certain machine from the Void Century was excavated. Now, if you're reading the Viz, this could very easily be a vague reference to Pluton, so let me cover that real quick. Not only is it vague, but the conversation retreads old ground, so I can see the vision here. But again, this is why I stress context. Given that we got a major reveal about Pluton at the end of Wano, I doubt that Oda would take us all the way to Egghead just to talk about it some more. Also, it just doesn't make sense for Shaka to be so vague and secretive about old information just to go and talk openly about Ohara. It makes more sense that he's just being cheeky with Robin here because this is all illegal intel that could get them killed anyway. And in this moment, they're the only two people in the room who are aware of this fact. And you can't even make the argument that Shaka was somehow testing Robin before spilling the beans on Ohara, because he already knows that Robin's an archaeologist from Ohara. So this "you tell me" line at the end is Shaka confirming to both Robin and the reader that whatever she knows is probably true. Also, I feel like Shaka would have just used the word ship here if he was referring to Pluton. I know that kind of sounds like a nitpick, but we've already established how one word could affect an entire interpretation, so I'm just trying to be safe here. And that brings me to the other important word in this panel: excavated. Whatever this machine is, it's been discovered and relocated. Pluton has been discovered, but from what we know, it's still in Wano. So this weapon can only be Uranus, which means the only involvement that Vegapunk would have with Lulusia is providing the weapon's power source. When Ivankov speculates that whatever Sabo saw in Lulusia is likely to be an ancient weapon, Dragon asks why the government waited so long to use it. Well, stupid, their rule has never been challenged to this extent before. One more point towards the Dragon is a fraud tally. But if we're to take Dragon seriously, or as someone who has at least studied the world government thoroughly, then his question here would at least suggest that there have been other times where the world government had more than enough reason to whip out Uranus and didn't. Think Ohara or God Valley. I can only think of two reasons as to why this would be the case. One, they didn't have the ancient weapon yet, or two, they didn't have the means to power it. Because let's be real, if the world government had an ancient weapon and a means to power it, then there would have been no need for a buster call at Ohara. It would have been blown off the map. Again, one of the first reveals that we get in Egghead is that the entire island is powered by fire, and that it would be great if we could harness the power of the sun. Now, I've seen people take this last bit and try and use it to explain away why Vegapunk is being assassinated. Basically, the power source that Vegapunk gave the world government clearly isn't finished, it's not infinite. So they used it, learned it was a one-time use, got mad, and then decided, we're gonna kill this guy over it. But we know the exact reason why Vegapunk's being hunted down. It's because York told the Gorosei that he's been studying the poneglyphs, and when CP agents came to confirm, they were kidnapped, meaning that in the world government's eyes, Vegapunk is not only studying the ancient past, but he's also rebelling against them at the worst possible time. So they'll gladly take what he's already invented and do away with him in the satellites, because the world government is plenty ready for the final war. But this theory does touch on something very important, which is why I bring it up. There most likely is a problem with the fuel source. It's just not the reason that Vegapunk's being assassinated. Now, when I say problem, you have to understand that this is Vegapunk we're talking about. The same guy who considers Momo's fruit a failure because it's pink. And Egghead seems to be running just fine on its current fuel source, so what gives? Well, the main issue that we've seen with Vegapunk's inventions is that they don't scale well. Sure, Egghead runs just fine, but in his own words, you can't accomplish this worldwide. And that's just mind-blowing to me because this is the same guy who's been studying and recreating Lunarians. The same guy who's looking to convert Kuma's emotions into energy. So how has he not figured it out yet? Well, I'll get to that in just a second. It's probably safe to assume that Uranus here can't fire off over and over again without an infinite power source. But with Vegapunk out of the picture, where would they get that from? Well, Imu just ordered the Gorosei to go capture Vivi after learning about her ancestor being a D. Which brings us to the Will of Fire. Not that one. Well, maybe. So we're at the point in the video where I take all this information that I've gathered, all this rapport and credibility that I've built up with you, and I go right off the deep end with it. Because if Vivi truly is required to use Uranus permanently, then that means that this ancient power source that Vegapunk could not replicate, the Mother Flame itself, is none other than the Will of D. I mean, if no scientist in history, not even the greatest scientist that history's seen, could replicate this power source, then maybe it truly is a thing of will and ambition. Only in the case of Uranus, then its power source would be a specific descendant. Now, whether this seems obvious or far-fetched to you, consider this. Who's gonna power Pluton? I'm joking, I have no idea if Pluton's gonna require a specific captain to power it, but it could be the case, just not one I'm trying to make right now. Seriously though, there are two things that Vegapunk has explicitly told us he's unsure of, or has simply only been able to theorize about. The first is the eternal power source that we've been discussing this whole video, but the second is another power source, known as dreams. In chapter 1069, Vegapunk breaks down his theory of how the devil fruits were created, and it all stems back to the hopes and dreams of humanity itself. This can explain so much. The reason you can't create the Iron Giant's original power source is because it's not tangible, it's running based off someone else's will. The reason why you have so many Beast Pirate devil fruits that end up as monstrosities is because the zones have a will of their own and it's interfering. Luffy's own devil fruit has been theorized to be literally avoiding the world government for the past 800 years. A lot of events in One Piece happened because of inherited will. Something that at first seemed metaphorical has now grown into a literal power source, not only due to our understanding of Haki expanding, but by the way Oda implements it into the story. Hell, if Buggy can move islands with his will, then it's gotta be real. I just can't help but think about what triggered the Iron Giant 200 years ago. As far as we know, it got up on its own. But how? Was it a literal timer that was set up 800 years ago using Haki? Like, was the Haki that strong in the ancient kingdom that they were able to go, in about 600 to 700 years, this night is going to move to G5? I don't know that much, but I can at least say I'm confident in the Will of Fire. Hell, with the most recent chapter being a reference to Kakashi's speech, I can't even joke about that term anymore. At this point, you can convince me that Uranus is an actual spaceship, and I might actually believe you. Matter of fact, I might try and convince you of that next time. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this theory. This took a while for me to make because the Egghead reread was a lot more time consuming than I thought it would be, but that was back when I initially intended this video to be a 2-part short, so there's that. But let me know what you think in the comments below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video and you weren't hate watching, then I deserve a like and a sub at the very least. Now get out there and rewatch the One Piece live action trailer over and over again until you break YouTube. But most importantly, have a good day and be safe. Bye.